Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Anxiety Chats. Today we have another anonymous story for you with a new co-host, Charlotte. This time we have a story about job anxiety and how this listener overcame that. If you would like to share your anonymous story with us, then head to the link of wherever you're listening to this podcast, or you can come onto the podcast and chat to me about your story in person. So welcome, Charlotte. Charlotte's been here before on Anxiety Chats.
Yeah, hello.
It's nice to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's so nice to have you back. We have quite similar anxieties, so...
Yes.
Oh, it's just turned to level 11.
Oh, has it? Yes, it has.
Everyone make a wish.
My mum.
That must be a good sign that we're...
My mum keeps seeing double numbers.
Your mum what?
She's like, what does it mean? What does it mean? Every day she's like, here it is again.
Some people do believe in, like... I don't really know what I believe at all. It's hard to know sometimes whether it's OCD or if it's something that everyone makes a wish for. Like, I'm the kind of person that salutes magpies and stuff as well.
Yeah, it's if you see more than one. If you see one, it's bad. If you see more than one, it's good, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if these are just like Scottish wife tales.
Yeah,
and other people are like, magpies?
No idea.
Maybe just a Scottish mum thing. I don't know. Okay, so today's story is such a lovely story. I was so... when I read it, I was like, I love this girl so much. So I'll go ahead and read it. A couple of years ago, I ended up getting a full-time traineeship as a chef after struggling to find work that would pay my bills. I was so desperate to make a good impression and prove myself, not just to my bosses, but to myself, that I thought very little about my own boundaries and long-term sustainability. Over the first few months, the place revealed itself to be a dumpster fire, and I ended up taking on way too many responsibilities because I was afraid to say no. I never stood up for myself, and when anyone was annoyed or angry, I assumed it was my fault. I went from ecstatic to crying every single morning in the shower within months. On top of everything, the owners were slimeballs who realised they could get away with anything with me. And they cut my pay after almost a year of me being the only person keeping their kitchen running, because they knew I would see it as a reflection of my poor performance and not them being predatory. I was basically traumatised by this experience and couldn't work a normal job for a while after, because I was so afraid of winding up trapped in another position like that. But looking back, there's a lot I could have done differently that I now do in my current work. First, I don't work in restaurants or kitchens anymore. This was the most obvious takeaway. But in terms of managing my own mental health, I keep a close eye on recognising and respecting my own limits. I refuse to overextend myself, especially for unstable co-workers. I remind myself that I'm actually quite capable and smart, and that I wouldn't be employed if I weren't good enough to do the job. When a boss or co-worker is directing negative feelings towards me, or causing unpleasant situations, I take the time to ask myself if I really had anything to do with it. I don't manage other people's emotions. The expectations I have for myself are gargantuan compared to what a responsible person might expect from a colleague or employee. I have a friend with ADHD who is a literal cancer researcher and yet has little trouble making his work stress. I asked him how he does it. I'll never forget his reply. Most people are, like, pretty incompetent. Just showing up and trying is usually fine. I love this story so much.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever worked in hospitality before or any work like that, but it's usually an absolute nightmare. And I can totally relate. I've actually had a pretty much exact experience with this girl, like pretty much word for word. This could have been my story of when a manager or somebody in a position where there's a hierarchy realizes that you have anxiety, they might start taking the piss.
Yeah. I've only ever worked in like shops. I've never worked in a restaurant or anything. I found that quite difficult with like anxiety and stuff.
I think the like thing with jobs, like working with anxiety in general, is really hard. And I think the most common questions I get are surrounded by work, because it's one of those things that we have to do most of the time. Most of the time people generally have to work because it's the way that we earn money and the way that we get food and the way that we can pay our rent. So it's one of those things, if we can't do it, it feels just like, well, what am I supposed to do? I think this person's from America, so I don't know what the situation is with things like benefits and welfare. But here,
Yeah.
that's a whole other kettle of fish.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in a place right now where it's like I'm off uni for the summer, but I'm also not well enough to work. And a lot of people will ask me, they'll be like, "Oh, so when are you getting a job? What are you doing over the summer?" And like I don't want to get into that conversation. So I'm just like, "Oh, I'm just trying to keep myself busy. I don't know." Yeah, I'm finding it
Totally.
stressful.
I've been there. I remember when I worked in a bar, actually, people would be like, so what else do you do? I'd be like, this. Like, I think we've spoken about before in this podcast about how busyness and how you look to other people. I think me and Katie have spoken about this. Busyness is seen as good and okay and socially acceptable. And if you aren't working or not as busy, that's seen as bad. Where actually, like this person, is creating boundaries. You know your boundaries right now. You're also still super young. Like, when you give yourself time now, it might contribute to you in the future being able to do things in a way that you want to. I just think we all have different boundaries. Like this girl was saying, like she's discovered her boundaries through a pretty horrible situation, but it sounds like you've also discovered your boundaries, Charlotte, of I'm trying my best and these are the boundaries I have right now because I am resting before I go to university, which is a massive thing in itself that you should be so proud of.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just people always like asking questions, and I don't know. I find it quite difficult to know the right answer because they're like if you tell them the truth, they're like, I don't believe you, or they're like, I think you could do it anyway, and it's like, I don't think I can. So yeah,
Totally. And there's a fine line between somebody believing in you and being like, oh, I think you can do it, and being like, I think you should do it. Because really,
yeah,
at the end of the day, nobody is ever, ever, ever going to understand your mind except you. So you know your own boundaries, and those boundaries, I really don't think will always be the same way. We change and we grow and we find new opportunities and new ways to do things. But also, you're going to university. Like, where's the celebration? That's the celebration, you know?
yeah. I mean, when I quit my last job, I think I quit in January, and I didn't really. I just kind of I told some people, but I told most people I was just like, oh, I was just too busy with uni. I didn't say the actual reason because it's just, yeah, you just don't want to get into it because people, yeah, I feel like, especially like older people tend to like, well, this is probably like, but a lot of older people in my life tend to kind of have different expectations and understandings of things. So they don't understand why I've left, sort of thing. So I'll just say that I was busy.
Yeah. I think they have like I said, not all of them, but a lot of them might have a thing of like, oh, in my day, there wasn't an option to not work. They're like, we're an easily triggered generation of snowflakes, I think, is sometimes how we're seen. But I think the coolest and best thing you can do for yourself is create boundaries and be non-apologetic about them. And like this girl was kind of like, that's what I just loved about this story when she was saying that she is somebody that's clever. She's somebody that's able to do this job. She's really found her own self-worth, I guess, and is giving herself love and herself the confidence, and it doesn't really matter what the reaction is. And it's so hard to get to that place. And talking about this, there's definitely people in my life I'm thinking of, maybe people that are older that have certain opinions that I find difficult to share my stuff with.
Yeah.
But it's like, where's the kindness? Where's the love? Like, I think when people create, especially in workplaces, when people create a loving, peaceful, and understanding environment, it makes it so much easier to be yourself. Same within like family situations or situations where somebody doesn't understand you. I just think it's cool that you're creating your own boundaries. I think that's really something to be celebrated.
Yeah. I think another thing is like I've realized over the last few years that like you don't know how someone's going to react until you kind of get to know them a little bit. And sometimes I'll think someone will maybe react some way and then I'll get to know them and they'll be like, oh my God, this person is so mental. They are absolutely crazy. And you're like, no, don't say that.
Totally.
Yeah. So yeah, you kind of just I kind of try to work it out before I tell someone.
Totally. That's fair enough. And I think especially people our age, you just expect them to understand. And I actually don't know how old you are. I think I'm probably older. I'm 27.
Yeah.
But
I'm 21 next week.
God, I was just like tarnishing you with the same brush. Here, we're not the same age. But there's a boy that lives next door to me who's 16, and he, when I told him about my mental health stuff, was just so like nonchalant about it, so understanding, so just like, oh, that sounds really hard. And then I'll tell people that should have much more life experience and understanding than him, a 16-year-old boy, and they totally don't. It's like you said, it's like, you kind of sometimes need to feel around the person and be like, how are you going to react to this? Because your own mental health matters. And also getting to the place where it's like, I feel like I'm almost in the place where I'm like, whatever somebody's reaction is, that's okay. I understand myself. I love myself. I know my worth. I know my boundaries. And it's totally okay if you don't understand that. It's kind of like what this girl did, of being like, I'm going to go into this workplace and it doesn't really matter what the reaction, if the bosses are having negative feelings, whatever their negative feelings, that's not mine.
Yeah. How do you feel about opening up in work, like telling your boss or whatever, I have anxiety, this is how it affects me, this is what I might need, like, because sometimes I find that's maybe quite a difficult thing to do. Sometimes it feels like you just have to kind of get on with it, even if that's almost impossible.
This is such a hard one. Like, every single place I've ever worked, I have told them that I have panic attacks and anxiety. My first ever job was with the nicest couple in the world, like working in a bar. Like, she would, like, if I was having a panic attack, there was no question I would go home. There was nothing more important than her employees' mental health. And now obviously I'm working in a place called Anxiety Chat, so they understand that sometimes I'll be anxious and I can't do certain things. But I think it's I've also worked in places where I've been open about it and it hasn't been met with the amount of understanding I would hope. But whenever it comes to anything, whether it's dating or working or anything like that, I've always been like so upfront and said, these are the boundaries I have, this is what I can do. And also knowing like there's so many things that makes you a good employee or a good person to be with or whatever it is. So many things. Anxiety feels like it is all of you at times. Like, there's been times where I'm like, there's nothing else in me except anxiety. It's just pure anxiety. It's not true. Like, I follow you on Instagram, Charlotte, and you are unbelievably artistic, creative, somebody that's sensitive and loving. Like, so many workplaces would be so lucky to have you. And if they can't overlook one part of you that might sometimes be an issue, then they're missing out.
Yeah, in my experience, I don't know if maybe this is quite a bad thing to admit, but I don't think I've been fully honest with like a lot of employers.
Well,
To begin with, I think from from what I've learned going forward, I probably will be, because, you know, in a way, how they react to begin with is going to kind of set up whether I want to work there or not.
Yeah.
But I did, when I worked, I think it was something like 2020, I was working in Tesco's. And oh, I'm sorry. My dog is. I'm looking after my dog right now, and I was hoping he would embark, but
It's totally
let's hope
fine.
he stays quiet. So I was working in Tesco's, and I had my job interview, and at the end they were like, "Oh, you've got the job," and whatever. I can't remember. I don't think it was that far, but I told them, they were like, I was like, "Oh, just to let you know, I have," and I decided to tell them I had emetophobia instead of anxiety, which is maybe a difficult thing to tell them because there's like less knowledge of that. So I told them I had emetophobia, and I had explained to them what it was, and they were like, "Oh, well, we'll just make sure that you don't have to like clean anything up or that." And I was sitting there and I was like, "Oh, I feel like I've not explained this well enough because this actually like is kind of a big deal." And they kind of think it's maybe like, I don't know, a fear of spiders or something, you know?
Yeah.
So it's difficult to know the right thing to say, I think, especially with like me and you, because it's like, do I tell them I have OCD? Do I tell them I
Yeah.
struggle with anxiety or panic attacks, or like, what do I tell them? I don't know why that's such like a difficult thing for me to figure out what to say. That's kind of
Totally
why
get
I
that.
wish there was more understanding of emetophobia. I did a podcast with, do you know Dr. David Veal? He's a psychiatrist in London. He like does a lot of work on emetophobia. And like we were talking about how it's such like a common phobia, yet nobody seems to have heard of it. And it's so weird. Like it's such a weird thing. So like just constantly having to explain it. But then like every so often you'll find someone else who'll be like, "Oh my god, you have it too," and you'll realize that it's such a common phobia.
It's such a common phobia, and a phobia that isn't like, I've not had another phobia before, you know, I've not had a fear of spiders or anything like that. But from what I've read and from my experience and speaking to people like you, emetophobia is such a debilitating phobia because it feels like there's no way of controlling it. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think when it's coming to workplaces, it's kind of like, yeah, what do you say? But also, I think if you don't want to and you're not ready to share, you're under absolutely no obligation to share. And if you, for
Yeah.
example, are working in Tesco and you end up having a panic attack and you've not told anybody, that's not your fault. You're not leading them
Yeah.
falsely. You know what I mean? I think people worry about feeling like they should tell people, but you absolutely don't have to. And it's up to them. I also do think, I think I've said this before, but, you know, if they're making an environment where you feel safe, it's less likely that you'll have to leave. It's less likely that you'll feel panicky.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes panic comes out of nowhere, and that's just how it feels sometimes. But if you feel like you're allowed to go into the staff room whenever you need to, and you're allowed to, you know, take 5 minutes, and you're having good breaks, and you're, you know, all of these things are being met, then, you know, it should feel more like you're able to do that job, which should be across the board in absolutely every workplace anyway, because people without anxiety, we all need a supportive and kind environment. It shouldn't be something that's like novelty.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, when I started university, I spoke to like my head of year and kind of tried to explain the situation to her, and she was like, you understand that we're not like forcing you to stay here. Like, you can come and go as you please. Like, obviously, I suppose it's a bit different if you're doing like a more academic, not academic, but like a more written subject where you have to go to lectures and you have to sit through that. But like being a practical course and just like working in the workshop all day, she's like, you're not trapped here, and that helped me so much because like I don't know if you felt I don't know if you remember being at school and feeling like you can't leave.
Yeah,
and like that kind of just like makes your anxiety so much worse.
totally
Um,
does.
and I'm not saying it like prevents panic attacks or stops them necessarily. If one's going to happen 100%, then it's going to happen, and I will have to go home. But it definitely helps like ease that anxiety and ease that like worry that like what if I feel trapped? What if this? What if that? And I know I've kind of got that escape should I need it.
I think it's just like it's such a weird environment in school generally. Like from when you're really small, from when you're 5, you know, you automatically are given no like autonomy over yourself, and even things like going to the toilet, you have to ask, and teachers sometimes can say no to you needing to go to the toilet, to you needing a glass of water, to you needing some space, to you needing whatever it is you might need. Kids are put into like really binary situations where they have to act in a very specific way. And if you're somebody like 90% of people whose brain doesn't work in that way, you feel misunderstood and trapped. And even things like sitting on the carpet with your legs crossed, to some kids that's impossible, and it just goes all the way up to high school, and not being allowed to even choose your seat, or decide to sit nearest the door. Or and also there's a horrible kind of like in this situation, the hierarchy thing of an adultier adult than us providing the rules and the boundaries, when actually each individual person has their own specific needs. um I mean, this person was working in a kitchen, which is probably, I've worked in kitchens, the worst place for somebody with anxiety, because it's very much shouting and quick fire, and there's no room for breaks. People don't have breaks in kitchens. It's like just a, I mean, this is my experience, and this person who's written this story's experience. It might not be everyone's, but um yeah, it's so hard. And I think that's when, I believe anyway, it's really important that we start creating our own boundaries, being really strong in our sense of self, and being like, I know what I deserve. I know my rights. I know my intelligence. I know my creativity. I know all of these things about myself. And I also know when something's too much for me, and I say no. Um, I think especially as women, this is a really hard thing to do, because we're told that we need to just go along with everything all the time, and we don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had in my last job, it felt like when I got it, it was like the perfect job because it was so close to my house. Um, it was like my local shop. It was like really chilled out. You know, and then it ended up that basically it was had to be 2 people on at once, but they would only ever really have 2 people on because of funding.
Brilliant.
And it meant that if you were like not well or if you had a panic attack, you couldn't go home. And like, yeah, it just resulted in some like awful situations. And that ended up being the reason I had to leave, because I was just
Yeah.
like, I can't put myself through another panic attack, because that was just like horrendous. And the thing that you can't leave because they'll have to shut the shop. And so you're like just trapped there, and you're like, oh, I've got like 6 hours left to go. Like, what am I supposed to do for 6 hours? Ooh, yeah, I'm just currently looking for somewhere that's like, I don't know. I wish there was a job I could do where I could work from home. I'm sure there is, but I don't know it. I'll need to look.
I think honestly, it's I've totally been there. I've been like, I used to work in a plant shop that was just me working. So every day, like every weekend, I would work. Just me. The shop owner, I was to give the shop owner a day off. And at first, I was really like, well, if I have to, if I have a panic attack, what if there's people in the shop? So I can't just shut the shop because there's people there. And it just like was really difficult. But I worked there for a whole year, never had a panic attack. Maybe I did a couple of times or came close to it. But the reason that I managed to stay there was because my boss always said, if you ever feel anxious or panicky, shut the shop. It does not matter. if we sell a couple less plants over your mental health. And that meant that I was able to stay the whole time. I was able to, do a good job there. And that's what I think a lot of workplaces are missing out on. Whether it's, I don't know, you're working in a call center or Tesco or a plant shop or whatever it is, like I've said, I'm sure a million times already on this podcast, if you're creating a good environment for your employees where they feel safe and understood, you're going to get such better work out of them. It doesn't make any sense to me why there would be a boss or a manager, like in this story, there'd be a boss or a manager that was being nasty, that was tearing you down. All that results in is an employee that's disgruntled and will work worse. They're going to not really care about your takings and your money. They're going to, not be able to do as good a job. They're going to feel angry at you, so they're not going to want to. It just doesn't make sense why you wouldn't just try and create a really good atmosphere for people. Financially as well, it
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense for your business.
Yeah. I had one supervisor at my job who was like, I remember having a panic attack one day and I was like, oh, because like I kind of knew how they would feel about it. I think I had some already and I knew how people had felt about it. And he was like, your mental health is more important than the shop. Like you can go. And he just let me go straight away. And I was like, it actually made me really emotional because I was like, no, like, I'm so sorry and everything. And he was like, no, like, you're more important than the shop. Like, do you know what I mean? So,
You are.
yeah.
Like, our mental health is
Yeah.
always going to be more important. And I really like the last line of this story that says, most people are like pretty incompetent, just showing up and trying is usually fine. That's so true. Like, we are, even though we
Yeah.
have anxiety and stuff, we're just as competent as everyone else. Like, we're just as able as everyone else. We just have things that make it more difficult for us,
Yeah.
Most people are pretty incompetent.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's going to have something that makes working a little more difficult. Yeah, just happens that for us it's anxiety.
Totally. You're 100% right in that. Like, it doesn't make us bad people. We're actually really good people, Charlotte, I think anyway. And we try our best. And I think you're in a great position right now and there's no rush for you to work at all. There's absolutely no rush. Don't let people make you feel that you should be doing anything. You're doing really amazing things. And you're 21. I don't think was I working at 21? I have no idea what I was doing at 21. Probably wasn't as creative as you though. Definitely wouldn't have been. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on today, Charlotte. It's been so nice to speak to you. I think you're amazing and so brave.
Yeah, it's been really nice to speak. Yeah, I love this podcast.
Good. Oh, good. I'm so glad. And thank you so much to the person that's written in to tell us their story today. I know that can be difficult, and I absolutely think that they're really cool and a badass, just like Charlotte. And thanks everybody for listening today. Hope that it could help you in some way. And we'll see you very soon. Goodbye.